The Russians appear to be expanding their clandestine war against Europe, this time targeting the German military directly and owning it on social media. Just why is Putin being so brazen? Plus, we're going to talk about the controversy around the U.S. strikes on the Iranian nuclear program. Just how much were they set back? And is everyone actually just saying the same thing? Let's get into it. Okay, so this I thought was a crazy story because this is one of the first instances that I've heard of Russian saboteurs targeting the German military directly. And this is interesting because it was a series of German military logistics trucks. In fact, these look like U.S. military logistics trucks because they likely sort of are, at least made by the same manufacturers. So these 6 of these trucks were burned in a sabotage event over the last day or so. But what was crazy is that, one, these are parked at a secure military facility in Germany, and they belonged to German Armed Forces Strategic Logistics Command, which coordinates NATO transport and supplies. So these are literally the trucks moving supplies from Germany and other NATO allies into Ukraine. And so obviously the Russians have an incentive both logistically to target these, but also to send a message to the Germans that we Russians can reach you everywhere, right? Obviously, 6 trucks it's actually not nothing. The German military, while they're ramping up their defense spending, like a lot of things in Europe and in industrialized militaries in general, there's a long lead time. And the fact is that you cannot offset decades of anemic military spending with 1 or 2 additional years of spending. So these trucks actually probably are much more valuable than their book price would indicate. So the fact is, what's crazy is that the Russian linked Telegram channels published a video of the arson itself and saying, yes, our people did this, which is pretty brazen for Russian intelligence, right? To sit there and go, hey, for years, we've talked about the fact that there's a lot of suspicious attacks. There's a lot of individuals with Russian passports who are conducting these kind of incidences. For example, in 2023, a Bundeswehr officer was exposed as being a Russian double agent. In 2024, someone poured metal shavings into the engine of a German Navy corvette. And German intelligence services are reporting that Russia has deployed a special unit in Europe to study the various sabotage and penetration methods. But what's never happened before, Russia's never owned it. They've always said, this is not our guy. This is a regular criminal. Maybe this is one of your people who just hate your policy of resisting peaceful Russian aggression. And so the fact that the Russians are now coming out and saying it implies that really there's not that much that they are afraid of. In fact, they want to get both ends of the propaganda victory here, right? They want to send a message to the German people and say, listen, Russia can reach you and harm you wherever you are. And they want to be able to also get the advantage of spreading propaganda to the Russian people to say, look, we can do this to the Germans and they will just take it like a bitch. And so this kind of incident is not meant as simply about damaging logistics trucks, but it is about sending a message. And the message is to the Russian people, hey, we can reach these Germans. They are so afraid of us. We are so dominant that they won't even respond when we literally break into their bases and burn their trucks. And in fact, that same propaganda message is sent to the German people to say, listen, your military, your government is so impotent, so weak that we can literally light your vehicles on fire on one of your secure military facilities, and nobody's going to do anything about it. This is, I think, emblematic of the Russian thinking, right? A lot of people, particularly in the United States, say that Russia's ambitions in Ukraine are very limited, that they are focused entirely on Ukraine itself, and that even that Putin actually wants to achieve some kind of lasting peace. This is clear evidence. This is the clearest evidence that this is not the case, right? Again, if Putin did not believe he was in a state of war with NATO, he wouldn't do these deliberately escalatory, provocative things, right? Imagine if U.S. intelligence was found to be damaging or destroying Russian military facilities directly, like U.S. intelligence agents were to be doing it, right? The administration would say that that was a blatant escalation. It was a dangerously reckless provoking a nuclear power. But somehow, despite the fact that Germany is protected by the U.S. nuclear umbrella via NATO, there is still this idea that somehow when Putin does it, it's not an escalation. It's really a really bizarre set of doublethink. But that's not the only bizarre escalation that somehow we've all just memory hold, right? North Korea reportedly has not simply taken its troop losses lying down. And in fact, it is so encouraged by the success, what they view as the success of their troop program, they now want to send more troops to Russia for the Ukraine war, that this troop deployment could happen as early as July or August. And we've talked about this for months. We actually said in January on this channel that the first North Korean troop deployment was likely part of a trial process. And the idea is for North Korea to do one of two things. One is to provide additional troops to the unit already deployed, so that those fresh green troops will link up with the veteran troops, and that the veterans will be able to share their knowledge and train these new troops more effectively, right? That the idea may also be to actually rotate in and out troops, similar to how the U.S. deployed its brigades in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it would sit there and go, okay, North Korea, we've sent troops to the front line. They've taken a lot of casualties. They've learned a lot. They've improved their combat operations. Now we're going to withdraw them, all of them, or possibly just their officers and experienced NCOs. I don't think they have NCOs, but experienced line soldiers. Pull them back to North Korea, where they are going to be training up the next group to deploy into Ukraine. And likely this sort of rotation system would allow, like the United States, right, where the U.S. military basically spread combat operational experience across all of its units over 2 decades. It actually resulted in a military that for, many years was one of the most combat experienced in the entire planet. And at the time, the fact is that this sort of spreading of experience, spreading of knowledge really can make a unit make a whole army like elevate it to the next level of effectiveness. So I think that's what North Korea is likely trying to do here. And Russia is happy to have them. Remember, casualties in North Korea are not treated like casualties elsewhere. They've taken reportedly about 1/3 to 50% casualties. Of those, probably about half of that casualty number is going to be recoverable, i.e. individuals who, after a period of convalescence, will be able to return to service. So likely the North Koreans have only lost probably, I would say at most, 1/4 of their formation that actually are like KIA, like dead in a field in Kursk. And that's actually it's politically unsustainable in a democracy, but in an autocratic regime like North Korea, that is totally sustainable. In fact, some of these individuals' families may actually receive such tremendous benefits from the state for having had a soldier who died in the service of North Korea that likely the families probably are hoping that their sons and daughters, or rather the soldiers themselves may be hoping that they are martyred or whatever on the battlefield because of the protections and benefits it would give to their family. Literally, it can be the difference between having your family eke out a subsistence living or potentially starve to death, and being able to see your family enter into sort of the inner rings of the North Korean communist state. So again, this report is actually coming from the South Korean intelligence agency, which has massive penetration of the North Koreans. So you can take it as almost fact. But what's fascinating is, of course, North Korea also continuing to supply weapons to Russia in violation of the sanctions, but no one seems really bothered by that. This includes artillery shells and missile systems. But what's fascinating is that in return, right, Pyongyang isn't doing this for free. Kim actually is receiving technical help, they think, for the satellite and missile programs. This is a problem because we know, right, North Korea already has a nuclear weapon. They already, when they got their nuke, they shifted their actual official stance. Before, North Korea had said, we are committed to a peaceful resolution of the Korean Peninsula conflict, or whatever they call it, right? The North and South. But the fact is that once they got their nuclear weapon, they said, actually, guys, we think we are the rightful dominant force of Korea, and we want to see the peninsula unified by force if necessary. So the fact is that one of the things keeping North Korea from threatening the U.S. and Japan is its lack of long-range missile programs. And so if North Korea was to somehow get its hands on both satellite intelligence that would allow it to target sites more effectively and develop missiles that allow it to strike more effectively and longer, the potential disaster for the Koreans and for the Pacific theater more generally would be a potential disaster. And the South Koreans are estimating this additional troop deployment could happen as early as July or August, and that the soldiers are already preparing for their mission, including there was a visit to Pyongyang by a top Russian security official. So this likely says that there is, if they say that the soldiers are already preparing for the mission, it's likely that those experienced North Korean troops, or at least some of them, probably like their officer corps, again, have already returned to North Korea and are supervising this training. Likely they're bringing in Russian security officials to say, hey, the last time North Koreans saw combat 5 or 6 months ago, here's how the battlefield has changed. They're likely briefing them on things like Ukrainian ground drones entering the fight, fiber optic drones becoming more pervasive and common, changes to assault tactics, right? The Russians seem to be remechanizing or remotorizing some of their troops. So all of this, I think, is a really, I don't know what else to tell you. This is an escalation. Like, why does this escalation get a pass by the international community? It fascinates me, the ability to sit there and pretend like only the West can can perform escalatory actions, right? You got to ask yourself why. Again, North Korea, a staunch U.S. adversary, threatening South Korea, another nation protected by the U.S. nuclear arsenal, and a strong U.S. ally. Why is this not seen as a dangerous nuclear escalation? Why is it only Vladimir Putin who gets to escalate at a whim and say, oh, well, I don't have to worry about this? Now, I'm not like saying, oh, we should start a nuclear war with Putin, but we don't have to, right? People say, oh, well, what if we were to sabotage Russia? What if we were to conduct strikes against North Korean targets? Well, would that be a dangerous escalation? No, probably not. It would be a reasonable response to these choices, right? How come North Korea gets to send its soldiers to fight in Ukraine, but no one can respond, right? And again, would it be the end of the world for the U.S. to call the Chinese and say, listen, talk to your North Korean friends, tell them to stop sending troops into Ukraine, or else we are going to have to stop them? And the Chinese will go, okay, well, we'll talk to them, but we're not sure. And then if there's another trainload of troops that goes, you call the Chinese and say, listen, tell the Koreans we are going to conduct a conventional strike. The same thing we do with Iran. Basically tell them we're going to conduct a conventional strike. We're going to destroy your ability to move these troops by train out of your country, right? We're not going to hit people. We're not going to try to regime change you. We are going to target these key facilities that allow these troops to leave the country. And because you have continued to escalate by not just providing logistics to the Russians, but now you're providing a large portion of their combat troops, right? Why is this escalation receive no response, either from Biden? By the way, I want to point out, this is not a Trump, don't interpret this as a strictly Trump White House criticism. The Biden administration is way more guilty of this. They had 3 years of this and they never did boo about it. So this is 80% of a criticism of Biden, 20% of a criticism of Trump, who at least is consistent in being like, I hate Ukraine and I want Russia to win. So before we talk about the other war, right, this is the huge debate going on over the strikes in Iran. Just how much were these facilities damaged? I wanted to mention that, of course, 2 things. The first is that you notice I am critical of basically both administrations, which means that sponsors, not a huge fan of the channel. Ads, not a big fan. Demonetization, pretty regular. But that's okay because you guys have my back. You guys know also that recently doubled the number of kids in my house. I had a second one. So that means I'm pretty busy. And unfortunately, when you sometimes need to earn the most as a YouTuber. If you don't make videos, you don't make money. That's why you guys having my back, it means so much to me, right? I know that, luckily everybody is happy and healthy and doing great. But if that wasn't the case, right, and there was a lot of bills and I couldn't be around to make videos, knowing that you guys still would be able to support me until I made it back, that is a peace of mind that I and my family appreciate so much. So you guys know, of course, every Tuesday and Thursday, we get uncensored combat footage from the front lines. Today, we're actually going to take a look at some footage sent to me by one of the guys in Liute Brigade of the infill operations. They're pretty tough in the era of the FPV, of the fiber optic drone. We're going to break that down today over on Combat Vet News. Obviously, it's combat footage. I definitely can't show it to you guys here on YouTube. But if you want to join, become a member, click the link in the description. But more importantly, right, if you do only one thing today, donate some coffee money to the guys in Ukraine facing this fiber optic threat, right? The 59th Brigade and a whole bunch of other units, including the Liute Brigade, who literally took me into the front lines in Touretsk, need our help to defend against these Russian fiber optic drone threats, right? So we are raising money so that they can have some reconnaissance drones to detect launch areas, to keep them highly mobile, and most importantly, to give them a sprawling network. By covering the roads and trenches with this netting, it can stop these fiber optic drones from penetrating and hitting targets. But it's expensive, and so we are raising as much funds as we can. We're almost at 10%, and we just got started. So again, I would say make your coffee at home. Don't buy the Starbucks, and instead try to hook these guys up. But of course, if you're willing to donate even more, the 59th has pledged to hook you guys up with their unit patches. I've literally never seen them drop unit patches. For everyone who donates $250 or more, I put $400 of my own money into this. So this means a lot to me to be able to help these guys out, because it's a tough battlefield out there. The link to that also in the description. Okay, let's talk about this nuclear arsenal thing. So this is, let's start with the story, right? Let's start with the base. The president has a trend where he simply says what he wishes were true, and then they continue to like double down. Basically, his allies go ahead and repeat it, or repeat versions of the truth that align with what he says. So here's what I would say. Let's see if we can find it here. Yeah, here we go. So immediately after these strikes on the Iranian nuclear sites, he says, Trump tweets, quote, "Israel's just stated that nuclear sites were obliterated. Thank you to our B-2 pilots and all others involved." Right? And for some reason, Trump has become fixated on the word obliteration, right? And he's been fixated on the idea that he has obliterated these nuclear facilities, right? And the fact is that there are leaked reports that from actually Trump's own DIA that the U.S. didn't actually obliterate the sites, right? In Trump's mind, obliteration means that the sites themselves were destroyed and would have to be fully, totally rebuilt, right? And the reality is that appears to not be the case. In fact, a top secret document reportedly was leaked by the DIA, which the Secretary of Defense did actually confirm was true, but he said it was like a low confidence assessment or whatever. But the DIA, again, is the intelligence arm of the Pentagon, said that the strikes against Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan did not obliterate the facilities, but in fact only delayed or set back Iran's nuclear program by a few months, right? The report said that rather than obliteration, now I want to point out, obliterate, not a military term. There is no military term for obliterate, okay? That's not a thing. So that's the president's opinion, right? Again, if I was to tell someone, hey, my garage got obliterated by when when a bear got in it or something, that's subjective. So one, this is a weird thing to be hung up on. Like, okay, sure. But the DIA says that rather than obliterating Iran's nuclear program, the U.S. bombings had set it back only a few months. Before Israel attacked Iran on June 13th, U.S. agencies said that if Iran had rushed to assemble a nuclear weapon, it could take about 3 months. The DIA's 5-page report estimates that was delayed by less than 6 months. So now it would take them about 9 months to get a nuclear weapon up and running. Reportedly, U.S. strikes blocked the entrances to 2 of the facilities, but did not collapse the underground facilities themselves. The DIA also says that the U.S. agency thinks that Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium was moved before the strikes, and so little of that nuclear material was destroyed. Now, there is a huge range of reactions to this. And what's the truth? Were these sites obliterated, or were these sites just merely damaged? Did they merely take out the front door? And the answer is actually kind of complicated. Again, the nice thing about Trump using a word like obliterated is that it kind of means what you want it to mean, right? Are the sites no longer functional right now? Yeah, for sure. How long will it take to get them up and running? Well, most of the consensus actually seems to agree that it's probably a few months, right? In fact, on Tuesday, the administration themselves told the UN Security Council that the U.S. strikes had degraded the facilities. That is an actual military term, right? Meaning that they continue to function, but at a much lower level of functionality. So it could be 1% of their function remains. It could be 99% of their function remains. It's been degraded. Again, obliterated could mean whatever you want it to mean. But the IAEA points out that they say, well, nobody, including us, the International Atomic Energy Association, can fully assess the underground damage at Fort O. But he says, I expect it to be very significant, right? Some people said Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium was not destroyed and the centrifuges are, quote, largely intact. But there's a whole bunch of controversy. And what's weird is, one, the president is extremely hung up on this, like, actually pretty hair-splitting issue. I mean, look at this. He tweeted an hour ago saying fake news reporters from CNN and the New York Times should be fired immediately. Bad people with evil intentions. Again, what I want to point out is that accurately understanding what the U.S. can and can't be capable of is not evil, especially when it comes to taking out Iran's nuclear program. If your goal is to see it obliterated, if your goal is to see the U.S., there you go, I'm using a word that doesn't mean anything. If your goal is to see the Iran nuclear program destroyed in its entirety, if you fail to do so, but believe you have done so, you probably want to know that, right? Like, if a doctor was to say to you, hey, I know we thought that your cancer treatment obliterated your cancer, but in fact, it might come back in a few months. Would you say that doctor is evil? No, that doctor is actually probably trying to save your life. So, weird take from the president. But yeah, you can see there's a bunch of weird cope. He says the cars and small trucks at the site were those of concrete workers trying to cover up the top of the shafts. Nothing was taken out of the facility, would take too long, be too dangerous, very heavy, and hard to move. He adds the failing New York Times and fake news CNN will be firing the reporters who made up these fake stories on the Iran nuclear sites. Again, I want to point out that the Secretary of Defense himself confirmed that this DIA report was actually a DIA report. It wasn't fake. It wasn't made up. Again, he said it was like a preliminary report, sure. But that's not fake reporting. That's not like AI generated report. He adds fake news CNN, so disgusting and incompetent, some of the dumbest anchors in the business. Right. And just absolutely unhinged levels of ranting about this. It's really weird. It's actually pretty bizarre and like kind of reeks of like insecurity. Here's how weird it is. In fact, the White House has dropped an official press release yesterday, saying that confirming that the president said Iran's nuclear facility has been obliterated and suggestions otherwise are fake news. This is like a parody, by the way, of a like dystopian novel. Like even a young adult novel, if I was to be like, and the evil like regime says that anyone who suggests otherwise is fake news, they'd be like, okay, dude, that's too subtle. Even a 13-year-old's gonna like know. But this is just really weird. Okay, one, right? They say the world is safer from his highly successful, decisive precision strikes against Iran regime's key nuclear facilities. What's wrong with that? Like delaying the nuclear facilities. Like here's the thing. Here's what's weird. Nobody's arguing that the facilities weren't hit, right? And like that there was meaningful, significant damage. The question is now, were they set back years or were they set back 9 months? This is like 24 months or 9 months. That's a really dumb question, right? So take it from those who know, who actually know. One, this is like really a weirdly written press release, but President Trump, again, the whole problem is that President Trump is not going to know. The Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, also not likely to know. The IDF chief of staff, also, again, not someone who was there and going to know. This person might know. And he said, this is the Iranian ministry spokesman who said, quote, our nuclear installations have been badly damaged, that's for sure. Now, I want to point out that no one's arguing that they weren't badly damaged. That's not a position that anyone is taking. And the Iranians may actually have an incentive to say, yo, you got us. Whoa, wow. Oh, man, you really took us out, right? Again, it's a little bit like if you get robbed and you give somebody $200 and you say, damn, dude, $200, that's all I got. And you have like another 500 like in your, like stuffed in your sock or whatever. You go, oh, $200, dude, I can't believe it. You're taking all my money. You got all of it, dude. All my money's gone, right? Oh no, I was going to use all that money to buy groceries for my kids. And again, you have like $2,000 in your sock. And you're like, oh man, I can't believe this, right? So there's a chance that this is BS. But again, this also is not like, it's very weird. It is so weird to be hung up on this, right? And look, JD Vance even says the Iranians are much further away from a nuclear program today than they were 24 hours ago. Again, that's what the DIA said too, that you damaged the facilities, but you didn't set them back decades, right? He said, now, you notice this, our mission was to destroy the Fordo site and, of course, do some damage to other sites as well. But we feel confident that the Fordo nuclear site was substantially set back, and that was our goal. Again, substantially set back. Notice J.D. Vance doesn't use the president's word obliterated, which is pretty weird and pretty telling. Because as we've talked about, J.D. Vance tries to maintain like reality and still somehow link reality to the president's like weird fantasies and fetishes, right? So the like, let's see. Okay, look at this. This is from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Initial battle damage assessments indicate all three sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. Again, extremely severe damage, not a military term. So that can mean whatever you want it to. And again, not really in debate. Like, this is what's so weird, is that, like, again, Marco Rubio says the Iranian nuclear program today looks nothing like it did a week ago. This is what the DIA report says. Yeah, the story is false. It's one that shouldn't be reported because it doesn't accurately reflect what's happening. They said, he adds, everything underneath that mountain is in bad shape. There's no way Iran comes to the table if nothing had happened. The DIA report does not argue nothing happened. They argue that it was set back by months, not years, right? And again, I want to point out that what's interesting is here's somebody else who I think might actually have the expertise. This is the IAEA chief. He said, given the explosive payload utilized and the extreme vibration-sensitive nature of centrifuges, very significant damage is expected to have occurred. Again, at Estefan, additional buildings were hit, with the U.S. confirming the use of cruise missiles. Affected buildings include some related to uranium conversion processes. At this site, entrances to tunnels used for storage of enriched material appear to have been hit. Okay, so here, in the U.S.'s own press release, they're confirming the DIA report, saying that the entrances were hit. At Natanz, the enrichment fuel plant was hit. U.S. confirming used ground-penetrating munitions. This guy is repeating exactly what the DIA report said. It sounds like the DIA report actually kind of nailed it. Not one person here has said that the report inaccurately described the damage that was sustained. Again, how long does it take to replace these centrifuges that are sensitive to subtle changes in vibration? Like maybe months. I don't know. I don't know about acquiring new centrifuges. Again, this is, do you see how fucking weird this is? Like, do you see how bizarre this hangup is about the president wants obliterated to be right, and he wants obliterated as he means it to be correct, right? And so this is sort of what we've also seen with anytime he gets run up against reality. We saw it at the NATO summit this week where a reporter asked him point blank, they said, Trump, you said you were going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. They said, it's been almost 150 days. There's no end in sight. And Trump said, well, I was just being sarcastic. I was just joking around. And this sort of like, I just say what I wish were true without actually having the data to confirm whether it's true. And then you have this laundry list of people who either confirm what you're saying, or in this case, confirm the report, but pretend like they're confirming what you said. Again, it's sort of like it's like your drunk girlfriend going, if you don't shut up, my boyfriend's gonna kick your ass. And you go, yeah, if you don't respect her, you're gonna have to deal with me, which is not the same thing as kicking someone's ass, right? Instead, you say, yeah, you can't mess with her. Like, I'm gonna stop it. But at no point do you say, I'm gonna fight you. I'm gonna kick your ass, right? Like, there's key differences. And this is like, even that's not quite an accurate analogy. I don't even have a good analogy for this because it's so rarely happens when you have. Anyway, let me know in the comments if you have a good analogy for this fucking weirdness where basically, again, somebody says something untrue. I bet it happens all the time in like big corporations where the CEO is like, we're a world leader in AI. And then all the subordinates like basically go back and try to take the fact that they're not world leaders in AI and be like, well, we're technically leading the AI world in, like worm picture generation. Nobody generates pictures of random worms as well as we do. So we are a leader in AI. We're one of the leaders in AI. I don't know. This is just weird. Anyway, thank you to the Colonel tier members. Guys like Pierre Fucci, Dan M, Petch Taru, Henry Russier, I just got called Chris Rossi, AL90, Sergei Zinchenko, D Stewart, James Porce, B Himmerling, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. You guys are the ones who make this entire thing possible for me. Thank you guys all so much. I appreciate y'all. And be sure to subscribe to get these videos dropping today. Cheers.